we are discussing, well, I am, because I'm alone in my room. I'm discussing the rise to power of Mussolini, fascism in Italy at the time, and how all of this affects politics in Italy today. So let's get into it. He's famous, right? People know very interesting facts about him, such as the date of his birth and the date of his death, and other people might know some more obscure facts about him, like the fact that he was in love with his sister, which is kind of incestuous and kind of gross. Technically it was his sister-in-law, they weren't related by blood, but still, he did bring dishonor to the family with that. And also he abandoned the woman and married someone else. That poor girl. He was a sensitive boy, he was in touch with his feelings, he was adored by his siblings, he was the kind of guy that loved literature, poetry, he would, you know, write out speeches and perform them in front of the mirror, as you do. But on the other hand, he was also a very violent man. Mussolini grew up in a socialist family, but his childhood wasn't easy because his father wasn't very present for him. He was the kind of man who loved alcohol and other women more than his own wife and family. His rise to power is, I think, one of the most interesting parts of Mussolini as a person, because Mussolini started as a socialist. He wrote for a journal, he was the editor for a journal called Avanti, which was a very socialist journal in Italy. And at the beginning of the First World War, when Italy was still neutral because they only joined in 1915, Mussolini was still neutral. He advocated for Italy's neutrality. He didn't believe that war was the right move for Italy. And then when Italy entered the war, he actually volunteered and fought. But he was injured pretty early on and so came back. And that completely changed. He went from a socialist to a man that was completely changed and who believed that war was the right idea. And one thing about Mussolini that's quite him is the fact that, in a way, he sort of fell in love with his country again, but he fell in love with what the country used to be. He fell in love with the Roman times and he wanted to restore the prestige and the grandeur of Roman times in Italy, aka a time that happened thousands of years ago that he actually did not live through, so he didn't really know what he was on about. Basically, he wanted to be the new and improved Julius Caesar. Good for him. He and some mates, veterans, people who were uneasy and unhappy about the socialist rise of Italy at the time after the war, they felt betrayed by the Allies, and so many socialists in Italy wanted a revolution, kind of Russian style, and many people who were more on the right-wing side, who were more hardcore, didn't want that. And so he and his friends created the Fasci, oh my god, I forgot that for a second. He and his friends created the Fasci di Combattimento movement, which means the fighting bands. Most of them were veterans of the First World War, which meant that they had access to a lot of weapons, although I did find somewhere that they had some unusual weapons, like some of them used dried bacalao as a weapon. Why would you use food when your country's going hungry, first of all, but also, really, dried food? You're gonna use dried food as a weapon? Why? Why would you do that? Of course, these fascists started naming him the Duce, which means the leader, and that's how he first got his name. Now, something that was quite recognisable about these men is that they wore black shirts. And so they started calling themselves the Black Shirts, because they wore black shirts. I mean, and these black shirts, they started this campaign of terrorism against Italy's socialists. And they would literally humiliate and embarrass these people. They would attack them. They would take like a socialist leader, for example, and they would just gang up on him, attack him, force feed him laxatives so he would shit himself. They would take photos of him and then post it in their newspaper, just in a way of embarrassing these men, embarrassing and humiliating these people. And by doing that, they managed to change the people of Italy's opinion. These people's minds completely changed and it veered towards fascism and Mussolini's ideas. By 1922, he felt as though he should become the leader, I was going to say Germany, no, Italy. And so he and his other fascist friends organised March on Rome, which is now known as the Walk on Rome or the March on Rome, however you want to call it, in an attempt to try and forced the government to basically hand him the power. And so he marched to Rome to see the king, Victor Emmanuel III, who, funnily enough, basically just handed him the power. He was so scared of a revolution happening. He was like, go for it. You want the crown? Well, he can't become king, but you want the power? Go for it. I didn't really want the crown anyways. I'm just gonna go retire in Bologna and eat spaghetti bolognese until the rest of my days. Who gives a fuck? I'm out of here. He was appointed as prime minister that year, becoming the youngest prime minister of Italy at the time, and he was super proud of that. Rightly so, I guess, but you know. So by 1925, Mussolini had basically dismantled the entire structure of democracy that Italy had, and basically appointed himself as Duce, which is the leader, as I said before, and basically became a dictator, you know. Something about Mussolini that was scary, and in many ways compares him to Hitler, is the fact that people were keen to listen to him. He wasn't an incredible speaker in the sense that some of his facts were wrong, he would talk a bit of bullshit sometimes, but he had a way of talking, he had a way of making people listen. He was entertaining and engaging, and when people started listening to him, it's like they were under some kind of spell and they just could not look away. He went from a small number of followers to a massive number of followers in just the space of a couple of months. He's basically a TikTok influencer. One day you have no idea who the guy is, and the next you're like, oh wow, he's basically the new leader of it. What's happening? Like, it happened. It was a fever dream. It happened so quickly. People had no fucking clue what was going on. All they knew is that this guy was charismatic and engaging and kind of, you know, pretty handsome. I mean, I don't think he was handsome, but apparently he was very popular with women. Where does fascism actually come from? How did it become what it was? And I mentioned that Mussolini called himself and his mates fasci di accompaniment, but where does that come from? And I've got the definition here on my laptop. And they chose the Latin word fasces, I think that's how you pronounce it, which, and I quote, was the bundle of wooden sticks topped with an axe head that ancient Roman authority figures' attendants would carry to distinguish their rank. Again, ancient Roman times. The guy basically wanted to be the next Julius Caesar. This is where the word fascism comes from. Of course it comes from Latin, because literally everything comes from Latin. Fascism is a system of government that is led by a dictator that literally, he rules forcefully. There is no democracy. There's a promotion of nationalism. It's an totalitarian state. It's an authoritative state, extremely right wing. It's very, very nationalistic. There is a sense of pride that comes with fascism. It's the country before everything else, even the country before the individual. And so with that, Mussolini restored a certain pride, a certain national pride to the Italians, who basically lost everything and were completely screwed over during the Paris Peace Conference after the First World War. They felt betrayed by the Allies, they felt betrayed by absolutely everyone, and they felt like they were all alone in the world. People were dying of hunger and people were unemployed, and this guy comes in and is like, well, I believe in putting the state first, join me. And people were like, yeah, I'll join. I have no idea what you're on about, but I'll join. As long as there's change, I'll join. It's funny because often right-winged ideas grow when there is a unrest or unhappiness in the country. Modern example being the United States before Trump was voted out of office. And so that's basically what happened in Italy. People were unhappy, and in the end, the nationalists won, aka the fascists. Now, I won't talk about Mussolini's involvement in the Second World War, because we all know that he was involved in the Second World War, and if I were to talk about that, I'd be here for 3 days. But I will talk about his death, because I think that his death is... I mean, it's too good to be true, really. What happened is that this guy, once he realised he was basically losing, and especially the German forces, because, fun fact, he was allied with Hitler. You know, that guy. When he realised that the Allied forces were rapidly advancing on Italy and the German forces started collapsing in Italy, because yes, the Nazis were also in Italy, Mussolini decided to flee the country, because why should he be held responsible for something that is his fault? He decided to take a car and leave the country that way. And so what happened is that 2 Nazis were in the front seat of the car, and he and his mistress, called Claretta Petacci, were both in the back of the car. So this was a 4-seat car. And he was dressed as a Nazi to hide his face and hopefully get out of the country disguised as a Nazi so people wouldn't recognize him. And so he got to the north of Italy near Lake Como, which is very close to the Swiss border, because he was hoping to go to Austria. He got to the border, and once he got there, there was a little bit of an improvised search. There were a couple of Italian men who were at the border who stopped the car and were like, sorry guys, we're just gonna, check everything's in order before you cross the border and go into Switzerland. And as they kind of check the car, one of the guys looks at Mussolini and is like, dude, you look kind of familiar. I'm pretty sure I've seen you somewhere. And Mussolini's like, no, you got me confused with someone else. I'm absolutely not famous, I'm just a Nazi, good old German Nazi. I'm not Italian. And after a little while, that guy was like, oh my God, you're the Duce. You're Mussolini. You're the guy who's dragged us into this shit. And you're trying to escape. I'm not having that. You're paying for it. You brought so much crap onto this country. You are paying for what you did. Basically, they captured Mussolini, and the day after, which is the 28th of April 1945, he and his mistress were executed and their bodies were hung upside down in Milan, and I believe some people threw rotten food at them. And that was basically the end of Mussolini. Benito Mussolini had a couple of children whilst he was alive. One of these men being Romano Mussolini, who was married to the sister of Sophia Loren. And so they had a daughter called Alessandra Mussolini, who is, guess what? A politician, because apparently that's still allowed. She was also, well, she's still alive actually, she's about, I think, 57 years old. She's also an actress and model, because why have one job when you can have 3? She served in the European Parliament for the party called Forza Italia. She's a member of that party, who's the leader of that party is none other than Silvio Berlusconi. And I believe she was part of the European Parliament until 2019. I think she wasn't re-elected, I think she lost. And that's about it. That's all I've got. Let me check my notes. Oh, I've just written, actress Sophia Loren is her aunt. If that interested anyone, Yeah, that's basically it. Obviously, I think I could talk all day about how much Mussolini did in Italy. He was such an important figure at the time, and his legacy, in a way, still lives on in Italy today, which is interesting. That's the only word I could describe it with. But I hope you've enjoyed. I will link my sources down below so you know that I have not pulled this out of thin air. Yeah, I've enjoyed this. Thank you very much for watching. If you did, thank you very much for enjoying this. I hope all my facts were right. I did fact check all of this, however, I am only human. So I'm very sorry if some of these facts were wrong, but I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and I will maybe see you next time.